Hi, thank you for having me. Today's lecture is dealing with parents as Prima authors. We're going to discuss structural mechanisms of parenting and its effects on child and family development. Before I start, I want to tell you about myself and my professional partner for the past 17 years, Ofer Erez. We're both psychotherapists, parental counselors. We deal with research and training in field of parenting, relationship with their children, and knowledge transformation. We have training programs together with Dr. Anat of Crystal for the past 14 years. We had conducted research regarding the structural mechanisms of knowledge transformation to younger professionals. And this lecture today is dealing a bit with our concept of Prima authors, and going to explore how we deal with parental counseling and what we think about that. So what we're going to have today is a little discussion about why focusing on parents, why do they have such a meaningful impact on our lives. We're going to discuss the debate of nature versus nurture and how we see this, and salute a kind of way how we find a solution for this never-ending debate. We're going to talk about parenting impact upon offsprings and eventually come to the concept of parents as Prima authors, which symbolize the way we approach parenting counseling in research, training, and in our practice. So why focusing on parents? Well, first of all, parents are mostly important because they're primary caretakers and figures of influence in our lives, because family concerns are an outcomes of an interactions. I think that when family comes to therapy with their children or some challenge they're facing in their lives with a relationship with their children or some difficulties children have, we see many times, and in my experience all the time, that most of the problems are actually an outcome of the interaction that the parent has with a certain child or between themselves. In ReachingOut approach, in which Ofer was the primary teacher of it, and I actually learned my practical work from him, included always work with parents as a part of the therapeutic process with child or adolescent. When I started my practice 17 years ago, I worked mainly with children and adolescents. I was specializing with anxieties and OCD disorders and other psychopathologies and difficulties of children and adolescents. And when I came to approach the child in therapy, I saw that even if change actually happens, and it happens most of the time, the change won't sustain unless the parents undergo some transformation or process themselves, because they're the primary caretakers, and the child, even if he's in a very good relationship with the therapist, he still needs the parental influence. And if the parental influence remains the same, the change won't sustain. Moreover, I saw that if I work solely with children and adolescents and the parents did not change and did not go through any process of development themselves, what happened in many cases is the actually distance and between children and parents become something that I didn't want to take responsibility over, because I believe that parents always should remain the main figures of influence and not the therapist. So I started involving parents in the therapeutic process with the child. So I met the child once a week and then met the parents at the same week and started working with them simultaneously. When I saw that very fast, when parents started to get some insight and transformation and the behavior change, then children did not need much therapy anymore. They actually behaved differently, and the outcome was very present once the parents made the change. So I actually concluded that when parents undergo transformation as part of the process, the children quickly respond to the transformation. And that's how I became to explore this ways of how parents impacting children's behavior and well-being. The question of nature versus nurture is very relevant in this discussion. It's a never-ending question, of course. And it's very relevant in order to continue this discussion, because in our approach, we look at nature and nurture as a way to gain control and responsibility of what happens in our lives. So if the parents' approach is that everything is nature, so there's nothing they can do about, so there's no need to do any changes or go to any process of development. If parents believe and assume that nurture has a lot to do with an outcome, so it's their responsibility to change things in their approach in life, in their way they behave, then the change in child can occur. It becomes very, very meaningful. So is it nature or nurture? The debate of it has developed over many, many years, and recently many researchers such as Wexler and Grace and Hayes actually approach the topic with an assumption that all children are born with their own innate traits. Of course, the features and the presentation of those traits in the behavior and the personality of the kid, of course, is influenced by the environments in which the child grows. So he can have some potential innate traits, but the way they're gonna actually actualize in life has many to do with environment and, of course, interaction. We agree it is more precise to actually approach the developing child in terms of nature and nurture rather than nature versus nurture, and stop involving ourselves in a conflict and actually integrate both ideas together. So the child has his innate traits, so we're very different from one another. We have different temperament. We're born different in many, many ways, but a lot has to do with education, rearing, and relationship with parents, of course. According to other researchers, the influence of environmental context is crucial, of course, as well. We also believe that no matter how what we found and what research will show us and present us, and it's always developing, of course, regarding the influence of genes and genetics, and the experts in genetics actually have many, many developments, a lot of developments and actually innovative approaches these days regarding the way the genes represent themselves and what happens in the process of gene transformation. We know that we cannot do much as mental health professionals or educators or teachers, a lot to do about it to change it. So we cannot change the gene upbringing, but we can do a lot with what happens with it, of course. It's well acknowledged that parents influence their children's development in several domains and many, many domains, but we still don't know how those mechanisms, the way they influence, how they work and shape is still a mystery. So we don't know a lot of how things happen and influence. We do know the influence is there and it's very well representing itself. As psychotherapists, educators, counselors, parental counselors, teachers, social workers, even doctors, we have the position, we believe that we're in a position to significantly contribute to research and practice to evaluate the factors that will actually promote the environment, to promote what we can do and change in our environment, the way we approach kids, how we behave towards them, how we behave towards each other when kids are around with our friends or co-workers, or of course, and mainly with our partners, the other parent, in order to optimize their development. We want to make the world better for them. And I think that we can do a lot in every world of each of us as parents in our families. The researcher has actually suggested that they involve themselves in the elaboration of how the differences in parents and the way they behave towards the children are, of course, presumably related to the personality of that parent. Of course, as in any other thing, it's affected by the personality, but the way the parent become a parent, of course, so the past experiences, the way he was brought up, his relationship with his parents, social and environmental circumstances, and the evoked effects of children features and their behaviors. So we know today that, of course, different children evoke different emotions and reactions in behavior in different parents. So, but the way we behave towards their kids also shaping their features and their personality construction. So according to the authors, extricating the impacts can be very challenging. Ofer and I are actually very, very involved and enthusiastic to find the way to extricate the impacts and in order to promote the change that can be done with it. Parental intelligence, and this is a concept that we are very much aligned with, begins with the understanding that any family situation, in our view, the responsible adult is the parent. Acknowledging the fact that, of course, that the child is born to the existing situation, he never asked to be born, or he never asked those parents, this is what he got. And the choice of the parents is of course, constructed by them before the birth and without his involvement. So we become a couple and we have a kid, and the kid is actually receives the package without any choice or any control. We want to talk about parenting, it might be very much important to actually define what parenting is. It's mind sounds very trivial, but it's not, because it has a lot to do with how we see it. So Berg-Nielsen and colleagues, as well as others, agree that parenting can be defined as everyday parental behavior, including not just the behavior, the actual behavior, but the cognitions, the emotion, and attributions directed toward children, in addition to relevant attitudes and values. And what I want to add to that is when we talk about cognitions and emotion, attributions, values, it's something very, very conscious. Children are also affected by the unconscious emotions and fantasies, fears, anxieties that also are captured in parenting. So if we want to add to that, also the unconscious part, of course. We know that any meaningful interpersonal position, individual is motivated and directed by his personality, so his psychological features, both conscious and very much the unconscious to him. Parenthood, of course, being one of the most complex and most meaningful interpersonal roles for a person, encapsulates very the same. So we might think sometimes that parenting is motivated by different things than personality of a person, because we want to see ourselves as being motivated for the best of the child, but the best of the child is a perception that we perceive in a way we perceive other things. So who we are will influence how we perceive the best of the child, the benefit of the child as well. And it's not something that we can separate from who we are. So once we become parents, we still, first of all, before we're parents, we're individuals, and we're not actually can null the individuality in that interaction. Or while we become parents, our individuality comes up front more than any other interpersonal interaction, of course, and relationship, because it's so meaningful. Without knowing it, without consciously being aware to it, we can do a lot of things differently than when we become aware to that fact. So this is something that a lot has to do a lot with our approach to for a person to become to know himself and what motivates him in life, as well as in with his children. Mostly those are things are unconscious before he comes to the parental counseling session. So this notion is also supported by researchers such as Belsky, who discuss the influence of parental psychological characteristics about regarding the way parents manage your children. So it's not just us. But before we parents have the pregnancy and we have the first interaction with our baby, as transitional space, it's important to consider the pregnancy and the process of transition to parenthood as influencing factors to both parents and child development. So the way we experience pregnancy and the way we experience the first parenthood, first months or first days even, going to influence the way we develop as parents and the way the child will develop within in the interaction with us. So other researchers also, such as Dave Johnson, Ingram, many others as well, that we could not bring everybody here in this lecture because of the time limit, refer to pregnancy and the transition to parenthood as a crucial developmental period with important consequences for parents, for the infant-parent relationship, and the development of the infant. So we always influence both personally and interpersonally, and it have an impact to the person we are actually raising. Oakley and Mercer, before that, even mentioned that women report great challenges, challenges in their lifestyle, so everything changes, their routines. Easy adaptation also happens, and it's okay, but it has to happen. It's an adaptation to a very new situation the first time, and it's always new with any additional child we bring, so it's not the same as we don't have the same adaptation as we had with our first child. Will be different than the adaptation we're gonna go through with our second child or third child, of course. And uniform, this adaptation is challenging, and it's not limited to any frame of time. So it has influence throughout the whole development. If we refer to studies that suggest the other influences, so we have the pregnancy as transitional space that influence the development of our parenthood as well as the child development. We also have other influences such as marital conflict, ineffective parenting, also risking the child development, even if in a way that we know that a lot of children develop aggressive behavior as a result of being raised and developed in a marital conflict. So this is important. So according to Belsky, again, it's reasonable to assume that personal characteristics are the foundation about parenting. Of course, personal characteristics affect the emotions parents experience toward their children, and it's affected by on the way they assume the reasons for the child behavior, the origins. So if the parent believes that the crying of the baby is a manipulation or caused by tiredness, he will of course approach that child in a very different way. He will experience emotion differently to the child if he believes that he's doing on purpose or manipulating him, or he's just tired or not feeling very well. And according to that, of course, the process has resulted very much by the ways parents were raised in their childhood. When speaking about nurture, it's related to personality, of course, as a byproduct of communication and relationship with significant others surrounding the child. So we're talking about environment and everything that happens when the child is actually in interaction with his meaningful others. The crucial hidden difference between two approaches is the extent of the responsibility for the behavior expressed by the child. So if the child expressing the behavior that is maybe hyperactive or aggressive, it's going to be very be influenced by the way if the parent believes that it's in his nature, or is it a result of something that we do and the child is reacting to, of course. When we speak about nature, we place, and it's us and many other colleagues, responsibility about the parents as the constructors of the child behavior. So it is my belief, and it's been for many years and the way I work with parents, that if the child is behaving in some way, it's a reaction to the parental behavior before that. And it's evoked by the parent without, of course, intentionally, it has an intention to it, it's not conscious, it's not intentionally, but the fact that the child is influenced by the parent brings parents the ability to introspect into themselves and actually evaluate what do they do in order to influence the child to react in the way he reacts. So many parents that come to therapy actually experience themselves as being reactive to the children. In fact, the children are reactive to the parents. And this transformation, this shift is very much important in my view, because if the child is reactive, then we can do a lot to change his reaction. If we behave differently, the child will behave differently. And it's our power to change everything that happens in the interaction with the child, and the child will react. If we assume ourselves as being reactive, there's nothing we can do, and we feel hopeless and helpless. So this is mainly relates to the environmental setting provided by the child, by his parents, in order to enable optimal conditions for development. So what do we relate to as parental intelligence? The parental intelligence relates to the accumulation of the individual's personal system of symbolic forms related to the parent-child domain. So it's everything that we believe consciously and unconsciously have in our inner world that relates to the parent-child interaction. So if we believe that the child is someone who has to do everything we say, this will affect our parenting. If we believe the child and parent relationship should be even mutual, that we can be friends. In many families, there's an aspiration to become friends with their children, then we're gonna behave in this way. But parenting is not friendship, because we don't have mutual goals always, and we don't choose our parents. Friends we do choose, and we can actually be separated from our friends. We cannot be separated from our parents. It's not our choice, and we're very much, of course, dependent on them as children. So parental challenges is everything that we contain in our inner world that has to do with how parenthood should look like, what it should achieve, how it should be brought up, how it should influence, what impact should it have. And this is this intelligence is affecting everything we do. Most of it is unconscious to us. It is our view that the parent consciously and unconsciously is nurturing the child, preparing him towards a certain moral position related to the social world. Even if ideally the child fully adopts the parent's position, the social world is changing constantly, of course. Therefore, the position might soon become irrelevant. I think that the COVID situation in the past 2 years has showed all of us that we cannot know anything as a fact, and the uncertainty is very much apparent. If we wish to supply, it is our belief that we wish to supply compatible conditions to the child needs to supply the child needs. We should shift the focus from our parenting aspiration, which construct our attitudes and behaviors toward the child's specific individual needs. So today, most of the parents that we meet in a clinic that come to parental counseling that actually dealing with challenges with their children is mostly parents that we see that are motivated by what they want for their children, what they want for their children to become, and not and most are neglecting the child's real needs because they don't look at the child, but rather than at the fantasy they have regarding that same child. And when this fantasy is not represent itself in the child, the parents become frustrated, and he looks what is wrong with that child. And there's nothing wrong with the child. This is not the fantasy. The child is an individual. He has specific needs. He's a different person than what we see in fantasy or want to see according to our anxieties and other aspirations. The shift will force the parent to engage in a constant internal awareness with regard to the notion he's always driven by his psychic needs and fantasies. This is normal. This is, of course, a very human state of mind, which although unconscious might nevertheless be crucial in guiding his decision-making process. So I think that once the parent acknowledging that he's driven by his inner world, he will be able to gain the possibility to act differently and have a choice. We therefore suggest to shift towards conscious parenting in terms of actions and reactions towards the children based on a decision-making process of choosing the action and reaction which promotes the best possible way the development of the child with his specific characteristics. So once we acknowledge that we're driven by our unconscious needs and fantasies, we may be able finally to choose not to be automatically driven by it, but consciously make a choice what will be best for our children and not what we think before that, that we know everything and we know what the child needs, when we sometimes neglect to actually analyze and see whether this child is actually needs what we think he needs, or maybe we're just inflicting in our needs upon him. That happens in many cases. So in many cases, the behavior that will then be chosen will be inherently different from the instinctive one we would apply without the conscious parenting introspection. Therefore, although we're tempted to search for out-of-home influences, we'll often find that those are also mediated and moderated by the parents. We acknowledge our, by that, they acknowledge our initial concept of prima authors. For in our view, the parents are the soul and have the, the actually credibility and the authorship upon how the family dynamics will look, how the child will feel around them in the interaction with them. So if we take the responsibility, we take the authorship upon our parenting in every way possible. So it's in our, we're gonna reevaluate our assumptions, our fantasies, what we thought we knew and what we don't know, and we maybe ask for help in order to promote the life of all of us in the family, of course. So if that we know that family dynamics are actually influenced not just by the way the child feels, but also by the way parents feel, and everybody has to have their well-being under control and under introspection in order to promote and develop in the best possible way. So this is us, this is a little bit, and it's only a small portion of our concept of parents as prima authors. The concept is gonna be published soon as a book chapter, and once published, I'll be happy to send a copy to everybody who will ask. I'm here to answer any questions to any viewers that might have. Thank you for hearing me, and I hope you enjoyed the lecture. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.